Hey, it's Mike Andrews. Just wanted to let you all know that today's episode contains some mature topics, and we do encourage you to use your discretion before listening with your kids.
Our country that we have loved, that we have grown up in, and that we have good reason to love is not going to be the country that it was. It's going to become something new, and that's something we need to prepare ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren for, because we didn't get here over the course of a few election cycles. We got here over the course of generations, and it's going to take generations to get us out.
Welcome to another episode of The Narrative. Thanks so much for listening. Mike Andrews, David Mahan with you this week. No Aaron Bear. That guy has been crazy busy. I don't even know where he is at this point, but he's been traveling all over the country for us this week.
So thank you to those of you who've been praying him out of my life.
Aaron was traveling all week for work. He'll be back with us soon, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot of updates we can talk about next week. As we look at some of the stuff that's been going at the State House this past week, one interesting thing that's just come out over the last couple of days is that Governor DeWine has called for a special session next week around these issues. If you've heard the stories about maybe President Biden not being eligible for the Ohio ballot in November and there needing to be some kind of judicial or legislative solution to it. There's just a lot of moving pieces right now. The governor said, no, the legislature is coming back on Tuesday to discuss this and to try and enact a solution. So David, just kind of bring us up to speed with what's happening there.
Yeah, so it was something to see. I got home last night and got an alert that the governor was doing a press conference and basically he was visibly upset and disgusted that we have a sitting president of the United States and Biden that, whether we like him or not, needs to be on the Ohio ballot. It's a ridiculous concept that either one, right, the sitting president or his competitor, right, the former president, would either one of those would not be on the ballot in a state. And so what he was frustrated with was that the Senate has proposed a couple of bills to fix this legislatively. And what's happening is that the Democratic National Convention is being held after the time when we certify those who will be on the ballot. And so we would just need to bump the date to where, to be in line with what's going on nationally. It's an easy fix. It could have easily been done when the legislation got over to the House side from the Senate. They chose not to act and basically saying that we need to fix this legally because we're not going to touch it. And DeWine was like, no, this shouldn't be an issue for the courts. This is easily fixed. And we're going to, as governor, I'm going to force the issue. And so Tuesday, there will be two things that have to be decided upon. So they'll be voting on one, the Biden ballot fix, as it's called, and two, campaign finance fix. So right now, foreign adversaries and folks cannot dump money into candidates right now as they run, but they can for ballot initiatives. And we have a situation where, at least with one case, a guy from Sweden contribute about $14 million to the last ballot initiative that we had, issue one. And that's a problem. I think those on both sides of that issue should see that as a problem, to where one of the biggest donors is from Sweden and not Ohio. So anyway, we got to fix that. Again, an easy fix. And so both of those will be addressed on Tuesday by both the Senate and the House.
Yeah. And to your point right there, David, like these are issues that there shouldn't be a partisan divide on either of these things. These are good things for the people of Ohio as a whole, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, other than that, a lot going on too with some legislation that CCV is involved in this week. David, I know that you were a busy man over the last couple of weeks testifying in committee hearings and that kind of thing. And it's going to tie into our interview today with Daniel Davidson. We'll talk with him in just a few minutes, but I reached out to him because I saw an article that he wrote that really tied into some of the discussions and testimonies that you've been giving over at the State House. Not easy stuff to talk about, but it's kind of a sad commentary on society that we even need to have laws like the ones you've been testifying for over the past couple of weeks. And I'll let you explain what you found research wise and what you ended up talking about with the House and the Senate.
Mike, if you don't mind, man, I because this is so gross, guys. Like this issue of child pornography, even the AI generated child is so gross. I've had to testify on two bills. One was age verification for pornography, which basically we're coming up against groups like Pornhub, who's the fourth most visited website on the planet, more so than Amazon.com, which most of us go to on a daily basis sometimes. So there was two bills that I did with a couple weeks ago, one in the House, one in the Senate, and then this week had to testify on AI generated child porn, and basically expanding our current law for child pornography to include AI generated child sexual abuse material. This is gross. Before I get into that, I want to kind of share a verse that the Lord dealt with me on as I was struggling to research. And when I say research, I wasn't looking at imagery. It was some of the prompts that you type in to create some of the most demonic images and videos that you could ever imagine. Just reading through some of the prompts would make you sick. But this is in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 3. I told my wife, I said, babe, she was like, are you going to study with me this weekend? She was studying for school. I was studying for my testimony. And I said, no, I don't want to study tonight. No, I want to study tonight. And the reason why is I didn't want to look at, this mess that we're dealing with. I didn't want to have to get into it. And I said, God, why do I always got to look at this stuff? And this is what he said in verse 3. Why do you make me see iniquity? Habakkuk 1, verse 3, and cause me to look on wickedness. Why? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore, the law is ignored and justice is never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. Look among the nations, though, it says in verse 5. Observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days. So while I don't want to look at this stuff, and not just this, but even some of the other things that we deal with here at CCV, there are people across the world, kids in America that are being exploited and trafficked right now that are so thankful that somebody is being used by God to do a new thing to deal with their captivity, to deal with their abuse and exploitation. So even though this is a rough subject today, family, somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, so I think you just gave yourself a new nickname there, Habakkuk Mahan. I like that. We're gonna run with that around the office. So get ready. Probably get a new nameplate for your door and all that good stuff.
How dare you?
Well, David, you bring up a good point. Like for evil to be restrained, and this level of evil to be restrained, somebody's got to stand up and somebody's got to speak out. So while it's certainly not an easy task, this is the type of legislation that is going to help restrain some of that. And as we'll talk about here in a minute, we're seeing in Germany, in Western nations, where we're removing taboos, where things are supposed to be forbidden, where virtues are supposed to be so self-evident that you can shame and you can say something is totally off limits, like kids accessing pornographic material, or Lord forbid, kids' images being generated artificially in those types of images and movies. We've seen society decay to the point that we need to actually institute solutions and protections in law, where one seemed just so off-putting and so unnecessary to say it, that now the fact that we're having to do something about it is just really heartbreaking. I don't think there's any other way to put it.
You've got entire groups, minor attracted persons. K13 is a major group in Germany that we'll be talking about here pretty soon, that want to be able to have the right to be sexually active with children. We had an example here in Wisconsin. 42-year-old man made 13,000 images, AI generated images, videos. He sought out a 15-year-old boy, sent images to 15-year-old boy, disgusting images. And he's facing now 70 years of prison because they expanded their current law to include the AI generated stuff there. So that was one of the areas that we're dealing with here. I testified for Senators Johnson and Blessing on SB 217 to deal with that exact thing. And so we had 54 attorney generals, all the states and then the territories, including, our awesome Attorney General Dave Yost, to basically say, listen, we're dealing with AI in certain areas, but we have to include these areas of sexual abuse. The other bills that I mentioned were the age verification, which basically says that if a child or anybody accesses a porn site, you have to do more than just click a button and say you're 18. It has to be verified. And what's interesting, Mike, based on the conversation we're going to have, is I watched the only people who really stand against these bills are the porn industry. And they have a professional organization, and really most of them are advocating for Pornhub, right? That's the giant in the room. The pornography industry in America, they rake in tens of billions of dollars, 97 billion internationally. But they made a statement where they said, we want kids off our sites just as much as you do. But that's interesting because in my research, I found that all of the states that have passed this age verification type legislation, and there's 8 of them, all 8, instead of using some of that $97 billion to fix the technology to say, hey, we're going to keep kids off of here, they just leave the state, right? Because they need to addict those kids to pornography young so that they have them for the rest of their lives. It's disgusting. And thankfully, we're seeing both Democrats and Republicans across the country and here in Ohio ready to fix some of this.
Yeah, and that led right into my next question. I was going to ask, in your experience and just some of the conversations you're having around the state house, what's been the response on both sides of the aisles? Does it seem like there's something that there's not a gigantic political divide on that either? Like we mentioned with the Biden fix, it just seems like this is common sense. Both sides should be able to agree on this, right?
Yeah, I mean, you for the most part, like even when I testified this week, there was a Democrat that had some really awesome questions and some good feedback. But one time when I testified, I had a guy basically, he said, hey, there's different degrees of what he said, SOB. There's different degrees of offenders. And, these guys that are creating stuff online, and it's not real. Where's the victim? What folks don't understand is that in order to get really good AI, and they're saying all over the country right now, all over the world, they're saying that it's getting very difficult to distinguish the real thing from the technologically, generated stuff. And the reason is because you have to use real victims to train the AI. And the more real images and the more real abuse that you use to train the AI, the better the AI is. And so that's sick on its face. But in addition, what it does is it bogs down the system. So when law enforcement agencies across the country and the world are trying to bust these guys, the internet is just gummed up with so much of this material that it's hard to tell, okay, which ones of these are kids that are actually being harmed and which ones of these are just AI generated. And the technology is getting so good, these platforms, kids are actually using pictures off of their friends' social media, putting that into AI, taking off their clothes, putting them into sexual, different escapades, and then using it to what they call sextortion, using it to say, hey, if you don't pay me money, we're going to release all these images.
Yeah, that's just inconceivable that's happening. Right. But clearly why it needs to be, why it needs to be addressed. And I think it's worth pointing out too, David, on the age verification part. I saw a stat this week that now the average age of exposure is down like around 10 years old when kids are first coming across pornographic material online. Like we're just past the point where even if you're the most diligent of parent, that it's so prevalent out there on the internet that just locking down a device, locking down your home internet, like it's almost that's not enough. You can be the most engaged parent as you can be on those types of things, and still it's just way too easy and way too prevalent for kids to be able to get their hands on. And that's why we need some of that age verification piece.
Hopefully we'll be seeing those bills move fairly quickly, maybe even a couple of them before they break for summer break. So please keep that in prayer. We got to get those done.
And as always, action alerts on CCV's website around those things. So if you want to contact your lawmakers and make sure that they are aware of what your position on these is, go to ccv.org. You'll see the action center, the advocacy center, right at the top of our website. Click on that, send a message to your lawmakers, and make your voice heard. And that's a good spot for us to kind of hit pause for just a minute. And then we'll be back with John Daniel Davidson for a good conversation around this topic and what Christians can do as we see America backslide away from its Christian foundation. So you won't want to miss that conversation. Stick around. It's coming up on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism. Chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice. And secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian Chamber of Commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews, David Mahan with you. And we're joined now by John Daniel Davidson, who's a senior editor at the Federalist. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Claremont Review of Books, the New York Post, and elsewhere. He's the author of Pagan America, The Decline of Christianity and the Dark Age to Come. And John, we're so honored to have you today as a guest on The Narrative. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to have a conversation with you today based on an article I read in the Federalist this week, and just kind of I think, shocking story coming out of Germany where they decriminalized child pornography possession charges and things like that. Can you just give us a little bit of a background on that story, and then we'll kind of springboard from there into the rest of our conversation?
The German parliament decriminalized possession and distribution of child pornography. And this was a modification to, I guess, a law that was passed there in 2021 that imposed criminal, that is to say, felony charges for possession and distribution of child porn. And under the pretext that the law was ensnaring too many people and too many juveniles were running afoul of the law, and parents and teachers were inadvertently running afoul of the law in attempts to report the child pornography on devices and whatnot. They decriminalized it and made it a misdemeanor infraction, but removed it from sort of their criminal law statutes. And this was, of course, was praised by, I can't even believe I'm saying this, that there are pro-pedophile groups in Germany and elsewhere, but they came out and praised the law or this change to the law, and then, complained that the government didn't apologize to all the people who had been negatively affected by this law in the past, and renewed their calls, their long-standing calls, that the age of consent be lowered to 12 in Germany. So really kind of stomach-turning stuff. I don't like writing about this stuff and reading about it, but I think it's important to understand and really accept that this is happening in the West and grapple with the reasons why and then what we should do about it.
Yeah, and I thought where there's some overlap with your article is some of our listeners might be saying, why do we need to talk about this thing happening in Germany? Well, we are the Center for Christian Virtue. We believe that there are certain public virtues that should be in our public policy that are informed by our Christian faith. And one thing that you mentioned, or maybe the crux of your article, was that there are still taboos that should be in society. If virtues are the positive side, then taboos are the negative side, but they're both kind of working toward the same thing. And that's to create, or at least put some boundaries around what it means to be a virtuous society, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't really have civic virtue or like public morality if you don't also maintain some public taboos. And really, pedophilia and child porn are one of the last taboos we have left. We have, in our lifetimes, have systematically destroyed nearly every societal taboo that we had that was had because of our Christian inheritance, because we were a Christian society. We were a society that were, and we are still a form of government founded upon these Christian ideals and theological claims. And so we had taboos that went along, as you say, hand in hand with these Christian moral virtues. And this is, and the reason it's important to talk about this one is because it's like the last one that the left or the woke progressives or the neo-pagans, whatever you want to call them, are trying to bring down.
And if I could jump in just to ask, you mentioned a group called K13. When we're talking about breaking down taboos, it's very difficult for a lot of the folks I'm talking to understand that there are entire groups and entire groups of folks that minor attracted persons. I mean, these are terms that are in medical journals and things now. WPATH papers. What are MAPS, and who is this K13 group that is standing up, cheering for such legislation in Germany?
Yeah, this was one of these German groups that kind of came out with a statement in support of the decriminalization of possession, distribution of child porn. And its founder is this guy who's been arrested and charged many times over the years in Germany for possessing and distributing child pornography. There are many groups like this around the world that sort of advocate for that sexual relations between minors and adults should not be taboo. It shouldn't be criminalized, that it's natural, right? And that we are our taboos and legal prohibitions on it are backward and retrograde, and they persecute people who you are sort of born as pedophiles, or as the new academic jargon, the sort of a euphemism, a minor attracted person, or MAPS. And this has been going on for years, kind of in academia. And I actually talk about this in my book, Pagan America. I devote part of a chapter to exploring why this is happening, why you're starting to see this stuff from academia, like we see it happens a lot. It starts in academia and then kind of filters out into the mainstream. There are academics who are actively working to normalize pedophilia under the moniker of minor attracted persons, and essentially argue that these people shouldn't be criminalized. They shouldn't be persecuted. We should have understanding and compassion for them because they're just born this way, and there's nothing they can do about it. And that's part of their identity. You kind of see where this is going, right? And that it's a sexual orientation. Now, if it's a sexual orientation, we're sort of now getting into, based on everything else that's happened over the past 15 or 20 years, if being attracted to minors is a sexual orientation, if pedophilia is a sexual orientation, then it may be entitled to even not just to not be criminalized, but entitled to legal protections, to legal recognition, right? In the same way that other discrete groups of people find legal recognition and legal protections for their sexual orientations. So this is the drift that we are going toward. The arguments for normalizing pedophilia and recognizing it as a sexual orientation are the exact same arguments, the exact same rationale for same-sex marriage, for transgender ideology, for all of these other things that we talk about in other areas of our culture war, right? That rationale is being pushed and propagated by these long-standing groups of people who believe that sexual relations and sexual contact between children and adults is okay.
That's right.
Yeah, and it seems like this is where that side is going to say, well, you're using the slippery slope fallacy. You're saying that we're sliding down this slope. That's a logical fallacy, but yet, as you're doing, John, you point back at the similarities in the arguments and where we've advanced from where we started, and it's kind of hard not to see that it is a distinctly downward trend.
The slippery slope is not a fallacy. It's what the left would call a lived experience, right? We have actually lived through the slippery slope. Anybody who was alive in 2015 remembers that the arguments for gay marriage were all about, we just want to be tolerated gay people want to have dignity and respect. It's not going to hurt you, right? It's not going to hurt straight people to legalize gay marriage.
What two people do in their own room is their own business. That's what they were saying when I was in high school.
That's right. Consenting adults. There's no need to involve the law. There's no need to involve the public square. Two consenting adults in the privacy of their own homes can do what they want. The slippery slope was so slippery that it was like it was 5 minutes after Obergefell was ruled on, and that gay marriage was recognized, that people like Jack Phillips started getting hauled before tribunals and their livelihoods destroyed. He's still in court, by the way, more than a decade later, right? And one of the things I taught when I go through this in the book is talking about, if you want to know what the future of post-Christian America looks like, it's a boot stamping on Jack Phillips's face forever, right? To paraphrase George Orwell's famous quote from 1984. This is not just a question of tolerance, right? This is a question of imposing a moral vision over and against the Christian moral vision that we have had for most of the history of our country. And if we think that it's just a question of being tolerant and, as Christians, being winsome and sort of, the loving thing to do is not to say anything or to kind of let this stuff slide, that's a huge mistake. And it totally misunderstands the nature of the struggle that we're in right now, and the tendency and the aims of the other side in these culture wars and what they're really after.
Yeah, I've been stalking you a little bit on social media ever since I heard that you were coming on the narrative, and I got a reputation to uphold as somebody who knows what I'm talking about. And so what I needed
what reputation are you talking about, David?
Yeah, at least when Aaron's not here, right? So
that's right.
But something you said intrigued me. And I'm a fan of C.S. Lewis. I had all of our youth leaders read Screwtape Letters, when they came through our youth ministries. But this whole issue of materialist magician, right?
Yeah.
And even as you talk right now, I can hear our listeners saying, how, why, what in the world, right? And you have this concept of the disfigurement of reason, right? Which was
That's right.
Kind of the mechanism used, to deceive these what he called the materialist magicians. If you could break that down a little bit for our listeners, I think it'll help us even at this stage in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you start by saying, as Christians, we all know that there's no conflict or contradiction between reason and faith, right? Reason and faith go together. They are complementary. They always have been understood that way throughout the millennia of Christendom, and really they are to the extent that we talk about following the science and wanting to have reasonable and logic based public policies. Though that too is an inheritance of Christian civilization, right? When we talk about the emerging post-Christian era, and I talk about this all throughout the book, one of the themes that comes up over and over again is the disfigurement of reason and the destruction really of reason and logical thought, and including the disfigurement and misuse of science, right? People, post-Christians, invoke science on the one hand and totally deny it on the other. And it's easy we have millions of examples over the past 3 or 4 years of this happening, right? In our public policy debates. The disfigurement of reason is something that we also see in these debates about transgenderism and also the pedophilia, minor attracted persons debates as well, right? Because of course, reason tells us, obviously, that a man cannot become a woman cannot become a man. The sex is a binary, and we see that all through nature, and we understand that is reality, right? The disfigurement of reason, one manifestation of it is the idea that these things are not real, right? And that the only what's real is this inner sense of who you are, and that is what's more. You assert that over and against the physical observed reality, right? And so it's an assault on reason. It's assault on reality. It's assault on the idea of objective truth. The materialist magician is a phrase from C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters that you mentioned earlier, and in it, the Screw Tape, the head demon, is telling his understudy Wormwood, he's answering a question Wormwood had about whether or not demons should keep themselves concealed from the people they're trying to ensnare. And Screw Tape says, for now, our policy is to remain concealed, because if we expose ourselves, then we can no longer make skeptics and materialists out of men, right? And we want them to be skeptical. We want them to be materialist. We want them to be rationalist. We want to keep their minds closed to belief in God. But he said, we look forward to a day when we can maintain this material skepticism that keeps people closed to the idea of God, but introduce them maybe through a combination of psychoanalysis, addiction to sex, and other means to enthrall them and seduce them into the existence of spiritual forces. Not that they would worship them, but they would open themselves to these spiritual forces. And at that point, we'll have produced this materialist magician. And he says, if we can do that, if we can create this materialist magician who, on the one hand, denies God, and on the other hand, is open to supernatural spiritual forces, right? It's not reasonable. It's a disfigurement of reason because there's a contradiction there. But he says, if we can do that, the end of the war will be in sight.
Yeah, and talking about some of the great authors from the past century or so, I know you talk in your book, John, about T.S. Eliot and how he was kind of putting his finger on some of this stuff happening even before World War II started, right? That we were seeing some signs of this shift or the beginning of the slide into more of a pagan worldview, or certainly, deriving the public policy debate from that pagan perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And by paganism, T.S. Eliot and others, weren't necessarily talking about, sacrificing, chickens to Zeus, and these other sorts of like stereotypical pagan practices. We're really talking about not that stuff isn't coming back too, because it
That's
is.
right. Molech. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And a surge of interest in witchcraft among young people all over social media. And I discussed that in the book as well. But yes, the pagan ethos, the embrace of unreason and the replacement of, we talk about reason, but maybe it's better to talk about like natural law, right? We like Christians are the ones who sort of like discovered natural law and or received it from God, and it is the basis for so much of our inheritance of our Western civilization. The idea of human rights, right? The idea of freedom of speech, of non-coercion in our politics. All of that comes from Christian theological claims, normative ontological claims about man and God, and what man is and what God is, and how we should order our societies based on those realities. T.S. Eliot and others warned that we were sliding back into a materialist, a pagan materialism, and that it would be typified not by reason but by force. And T.S. Eliot warned against the rising Nazism and communism as manifestations of a pagan materialism in which societies wouldn't be ordered around these transcendent moral claims about what human beings were, but would be ordered around coercion and force, which is what pagan societies have always been ordered around. And he saw back then what was coming, and we're much further down the road now.
I have you have another statement where you say America. I don't know if this was your quote or if you were quoting somebody else, but you said America will not necessarily fall, but it will become evil. And I kind of see what you're saying there, right? Like the Roman Empire was evil, but it conquered what, a third, a fourth of the earth at one point in time. It was amazing, but it was desperately wicked. But at what point was America not evil? Like, wasn't, evil's always been here.
Oh yeah.
But just kind of walk us through that, and then let that kind of go into, how your eschatology in that. How you are seeing the decline of America happening right before our eyes.
Yeah, the line was paraphrased from a friend of mine who heard it from his priest he's an Orthodox, and his Orthodox priest said at one point in conversation that America wouldn't decline and fall; it would just become evil. And that stuck with me, and I've thought about that a lot over the years, especially as we've seen the broad contours come into view of what a post-Christian America would look like. And that's what I try to describe in the book. America, and my argument, the premise of the argument is that America was founded as a Christian nation. It was founded by a Christian people, predominantly Christian people. Yes, there was the Thomas Jeffersons and the deists, but by and large, America in the 18th century was a Christian people, and we remained a Christian people for most of our history up until around the middle of the last century. That began to change in really dramatic ways, especially after World War II and after the Cultural Revolution and Sexual Revolution of the 1960s. And the argument is that we cannot continue to be what we had always been, a republic of self-governing citizens, if we're not also a Christian people. The founders understood this. They said it over and over again. America will last as a republic of free citizens only so long as its people are moral and religious. It's not the kind of governmental structure that is capable of maintaining itself with any other kind of people. And so we're clearly not that kind of people anymore. Christianity is declining rapidly across America, across every denomination, church membership, church attendance. This is stuff that has been measured for decades now. The trend is clear, right? It's not going to turn around in our lifetimes. And so we are going to become a post-Christian people and a post-Christian nation. And what that means is that America is not going to be what it was in the past. It's going to become not a republic of free citizens. It's going to become a pagan empire, a neo-pagan empire, which is the form that all pagan societies take, is empires in which a ruling class rules and a slave or underclass is subject to that rule. And that's going to be the paradigm moving forward. And so that's what I mean when I say America won't decline and fall, will just become evil. That's something I think that Christians, and this is really why I wrote the book, Christians need to wrap their heads around that. The idea that our country that we have loved, that we have grown up in, and that we have good reason to love, right, is not going to be the country that it was. It's going to become something new. And that's something we need to prepare ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren for, because we didn't get here over the course of a few election cycles. We got here over the course of generations, and it's going to take generations to get us out.
Hearing you talk about that, John, it brought to mind Psalm 11:3. If the foundations are destroyed, what do the righteous do? So if we kind of level set that the foundations have been destroyed, where do we go? Like how do we prepare the next generation for what America is going to be in this post-Christian era?
It involves a refounding of the country. It's not enough to win an election cycle or to win a piece of legislation or take control of Congress or repose your hopes in a majority on the Supreme Court. Those things are false salvation, right? We should not repose our hope in that. We really shouldn't repose our hope in princes and powers of this world at all, right? As Christians, we know the church will never be destroyed, and we have victory through Christ. But for the world that we leave our children and our grandchildren, right? We need to begin building a parallel civil society, parallel institutions, and do that while also bringing the gospel and bringing Christian moral virtues back to the public square. We were fed a lie in the middle of the last century that Christianity, that our religion should be something that's private, something that happens in our homes and our churches. It doesn't belong in the public space. It's totally wrong. It's totally antithetical to the way most Americans understood religion, the role of religion in public life in America. And we need to totally reject that lie and bring our faith back into the streets, back into the realm of public policy, back into our political debates, back into our public celebrations, right? And build parallel institutions, right? We're not going to take over the public schools. Pull your kids out of public schools. If you lead a big church, start a school. right? If there are no big churches, band together with other churches to start a school, start homeschool pods, whatever you have to do, and then get involved locally. Take over your local city council, take over your library, get the porn out of the library and the public schools, bring back, Christmas parades, bring back, and it doesn't matter if you're Catholic or Protestant, evangelical, whatever. Do Saints' Day processions down the streets of your town. Make Christianity a visible part of public life again, and
Yeah.
make the church stronger. And from that core, from that maybe smaller Christian core, that will be the source of renewal and revival and refounding that this society will have to have.
Yeah, John, I really appreciate that concept of political life is not ultimate; it's ultimately religious and not secular.
Right.
A little pushback, and it may not even be a pushback, but I think as we're talking about what Germany just decided to do with children, with these minor attracted people, want to have sex with children and abuse children. Our nation was partially founded upon folks who did the same with slaves. And so my only thing would be is that, and at the same time, that slave nation has turned into the #1 nation on the planet where Black and brown people want to immigrate to. And so the only thing I would differ with is that there's nothing well, it was supernatural, but I think that the purity is not in the land. The purity is in how God used these wicked and evil men, like all of us are today, right? Our righteousness is as a foolish, filthy rags, but he used those wicked and filthy people to create a document and to bake in the word of God, even to how we separate our powers according to Isaiah 33, right? The Lord is judge, the Lord is lawgiver, the Lord is king, to where even when sinful man starts working its work, we can go back to those founding documents and right the ship to where it gets better and better and better. What I see happening now in society is that we are taking him out of those founding documents. We just took him out and put demonic stuff with abortion into our Constitution back in November. But talk to us a little bit about how most people see politics as a secular thing, but you're saying no, it's a religious thing first and foremost.
It's fundamentally religious. Yeah, the basis of all societies are religious, right? Religious theological claims,
Yeah.
and I would say, to your point about slavery and the American founding, I would argue that the existence of slavery in the Americas prior to the founding and at the founding was a departure from those ideals. It was a betrayal of them, and it was an aberration, right? And I think that the founders understood that, which is why from the very beginning they understood that this could not be a permanent feature of American life because of the contradiction was so obvious. So they outlawed slavery in the Northwest Territories before the Constitution was ratified. Not only did they outlaw slavery in the Northwest Territories, right? This huge, vast swath of territory that we got from Great Britain that became like 4 or 5 states, but they also made provisions for public money to be used to establish schools and churches, right? So from the beginning, there was they outlawed the slave trade, right, and put slavery on a path to extinction. It was the generation that came after the founders, people like John C. Calhoun. He hated the Constitution. He thought Thomas Jefferson and all the founders were wrong about human equality, and he sought to destroy it. So from the very, very beginning of our country, there was this contest between the founders and their concept of a society that is ordered around Christian claims about the human person and about God's nature, and a society that's with this godless or that's post-Christian that wants to order society on a completely different basis, one that's based on power and coercion and force. And that was the society that John C. Calhoun wanted, and that the slave powers in the South wanted. And we had to fight a war over it, right?
That's right.
So to the extent that we are, and I'm not saying that America is sinless or that America is like this, pure vessel. We had problems from the beginning, but I think the idea of America was a Christian idea, and it's one that and it's an ideal too, right? We'll never fully live up to it. We're always striving for the ideal. That's the nature of ideals. You never actually realize them. So Um, so I think that battle is going on, as you say. That battle is alive and well today, and it's a kind of a battle in a way that we've always been fighting in America. And the difference today is that we don't have enough Christians anymore. The American people were predominantly Christian for most of our history, and that's changing very rapidly, and so fast, in fact, that Christians, by some estimates, will become a minority within our lifetimes in this country. And so that is a whole different level of transformation. The war then enters a new phase, a really unprecedented phase, because a post-Christian society, really, we haven't had a post-Christian society ever. I mean, we had communist Russia, and Nazi Germany, but communism and Nazism were defeated by the West. Now the West is becoming post-Christian. What does that bring? That brings a different kind of a fight, and that's one that we have to wrap our heads around and prepare for, and maybe sort of like be clear-eyed about. And that's really the main thing. Let's be honest, and let's be clear-eyed about what's happening.
Well said.
And I want to be, I guess, a tad optimistic. As Christians, we would say that despair is not something that we lean into. We shouldn't hear this and just think that all is lost, that there is a mission and a call for us as part of this, John, right? So
even more so, right? Given what we're saying here, the mission and the call is even more urgent, right?
Yeah. So where should we lean into maybe the most as we consider what we're walking into, that even if our faith is marginalized, we still need to be bold witnesses for the gospel. So any ideas of what this might look like as we kind of turn the next page in our Christian heritage and certainly in American history?
Yeah, briefly, I'll just kind of echo what I said earlier. There's really two components to it. One is sort of the private and personal and familial component, right? Changing your life and the life of your family so that it is centered around and oriented around your religion and the practice of your religious faith, right? Making sure that you pass it on to your kids, making sure that your days are ordered by that, and that your priorities are ordered by that. So, that means being deeply involved in your church community, making time for that, building a thick faith community around you and your family, making sure that your children are raised in the faith and not shipped off for 8 hours a day to these pagan public schools that will indoctrinate them and turn them against the Christian faith. And that's just that's a big one right there. A lot of Christians, they think, oh, I live in a Republican area. I don't live in a big city. The public schools are fine. It's not true. This stuff they have infiltrated schools everywhere. I live in a relatively rural area in Alaska, and the public schools here have psychologists who will try to trans kids behind their parents' back here, right? So there's nowhere that's safe, right? Walk away from the public schools, right? They're controlled by the enemy. Form new schools, form homeschool pods. Band together with other families if you don't have the resources. Move. Maybe it requires moving to another state or another city or another part of the country. Maybe one of you or your wife or have to change jobs, or one of you has to quit their job. Maybe you have to have a lower income, right? Or a smaller house. But we have to start thinking like being on a kind of like a war and mission footing here, and put everything on the line and say, my whole life is going to be devoted to the practice of my faith and passing it on to my kids. That's the first part. The second part is what we said earlier. Take it out into the streets. Don't let it be a private thing. Make it a public thing. Even if that means pushback, even if that means ridicule, even if it means persecution, like actual persecution, do it anyway. Go pray outside abortion clinics. Go process and march through the streets. Right. Get involved. Even if you're not the one who runs, get involved in like taking over the city council or the county commissioners or the state legislature. Right. There are some places that are lost. Right. You're not going to win over Los Angeles. Right. But maybe there's another place where you can find and fight on ground that you can win and form a beachhead, right? The beachhead isn't for staying on. The beachhead is a jumping off point to push further in. So that's the second part of it.
Yeah, I'm sure that was all great, but you lost me when you said you were from Alaska. I've been wanting to make it up there to go hunting. So if you know anybody that could get me a caribou or a polar bear, something sweet like that, we'll
David, those aren't going to fit on the back of your Jeep, just so you know.
Man, come on, man, don't worry about that.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised what people strap to their Jeeps and trucks here.
Listen, man, I wanted to share this as I was reading some of your stuff, watching some of your videos. You know, people sometimes get discouraged when we talk about the reality of where we are, right? Like if we're not talking about this condition of where we are with rose-colored glasses, then somehow, you know, we're not acknowledging the power and authority of Christ in the earth. But he didn't always promise that the world is going to be great, right? He says that he'll be great through us, his people. And I want to just kind of bring our attention as we close to Isaiah 60, one of my favorite passages. It says, "Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you." Right? Not necessarily your country, not necessarily your presidential pick. He's going to rise upon those that call upon his name, those that are his, right? That follow his voice, and no other voice would they follow. He said, "Behold, darkness will cover the earth, and deep darkness the people, but the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear upon you. As the nations get darker, his people get brighter. Nations will come to your light, and kings to your brightness, the brightness of your rising." So just because things are getting dark doesn't mean it have to be dark for us. This is our time to shine. Amen.
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 Well, John, thank you so much for the time today. Again, we want to be respectful of your schedule, and we're so grateful that you were gracious with your time this afternoon. Could you just tell our listeners where can they buy the book? Where can they follow your work? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the discussion with you guys. The book is out now. It's available on Amazon. If you don't want to give money to Jeff Bezos, then you can get it on Thrift Books, Barnes & Noble, anywhere that you want to buy books. The book is available. And you can follow my work at thefederalist.com and at Twitter at John D. Davidson.
All right. Well, John Daniel Davidson, thanks so much for your time. Great having you here on The Narrative.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.